So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our roundtable today. We'll be talking about international issues related to tax regulations for fundraising. And I thought as we get started today, we might go around with introductions, and I can start and then I'll hand it off to all of you. So I am Heather Hill. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Foundation of Chapel in New York. Chapel in New York is an international organization with foundations around the world, as well as fundraising services to help charities conduct their international fundraising in an efficient and effective way, and effective meaning tax effective as well. So as we go around, if you just want to introduce yourself, maybe a little bit about what your role is, and if you want to share one thing you're hoping to learn or take away from today's roundtable, that would be great, because we want this to be conversational and really be able to address your needs through this time today. So I'm seeing Christina up first. I know that you introduced yourself before we got started, but if you'd introduce yourself for the benefit of the group and maybe anything you'd like to share about your hopes for the session today.
I'm sorry, I wasn't really prepared to be a participant. I was just listening in to learn about how you do things. So maybe I should get off now. I hadn't planned on actually partaking. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're welcome to stay. I just wonder if there's anything specific you're hoping to take away from today as far as how we do things. Otherwise, I'm happy to move on. It's not,
I've done a lot of work from the donor side, but not from the legal side, though I am a lawyer. So I was curious to hear how, what some of the legal ramifications are.
Sure. Well, you are on the right webinar for that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Beth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Beth Korczynski. I'm the Director of Philanthropy for a nonprofit based in Minnesota called Turgar International. We're a meditation community, and we have locations all around the world, and we are in the process now. We've been around for about 12 years. We're in the process now of kind of formalizing the relationships with our local groups. So we're beginning the work of entering into affiliate or subsidiary agreements. And so I'm kind of, interested in what the implications from, the fundraising perspective might be, so that I can be better prepared for when we start that change. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Beth. Tim.
Hey, Heather, good to see you again. Nancy as well. Tim Wolf, Director, International Development, University of Minnesota Foundation. Cover our system-wide constituents, globally, small team, and good to see everyone here. Hi, Mimi. And just we've been pretty Greater China focused in our recent time, but looking to maybe expand out to other markets and just learn some more information and details that may help us as we broaden our engagement. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Tim. Mimi.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Tim. I think Tim pretty much said what I would say. I'm at Carnegie Mellon University, and we, of course, are working with Chapel in New York, and our focus has mostly been East Asia, but also with same exact story. The pandemic's allowing us to reach out to other areas. So just wanted to see, what you were having to say, specifically about areas that are not China, maybe, although maybe I have something to say about China too, I don't know. So just sort of more for informational purposes. We're also relatively small team of 3 international gift officers working everywhere outside of the United States. So.
Great, thank you, Mimi. And Justine.
Hi, can you hear me okay? I'm back on my desktop for the first time in almost a year and a half.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'll put my video on. So I work at, oh, that's different too. Cornell University, and I do gift planning. We have a dedicated team of international fundraisers here, but more often than not, they come to me when there's specific tax issues related to the solicitation they're making or the gift they're trying to close. So I just am here to listen and try and keep on top of anything that's being discussed out in kind of the world of international philanthropy.
Great. Thanks so much. And I will hand it off to Nancy Bixen. She is the mastermind, the brilliant mind behind Chapel in New York, our managing director. I'll let her introduce herself, give a little bit of her background and why she is one of our speakers today for this roundtable. So Nancy, I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Heather. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we're delighted to see everybody. And I think I'd probably also like to introduce Jane Peebles, who is who's my co-speaker and who is a lawyer in LA. I'm also a lawyer for my sins, and I suspect we have a few of us here sitting around here. Yeah, so Chapel in New York's been going for 25 years, and we started out with the idea that we would help non-US charities fundraise in the US by setting up 501c3s. And about 6 years ago, when I took over running Chapel in New York, I realized or thought that actually after years and years and years of setting up things, that probably for organizations fundraising in other countries, setting up legal entities was probably a bad idea. Because of course, what was happening is that regulations were getting much more difficult in countries, and we all know that, you know, anybody that's has used the word China is a perfect example, but it's true everywhere around the world. And so that what was ending up happening is that charitable organizations were, you know, whether they were universities or charities, were setting these things up. They were setting up Section 88s in Hong Kong. They were setting up US 501c3s, registered charities in the UK, etc. And what they were then spending as much time doing was managing the regulations and managing that what has now become a four-letter word, banks, and the nuisance of having to have bank accounts, and that it was actually a distraction from the big and the most important thing, which is actually doing the fundraising. So we kind of pivoted, and we still set up 501c3s, we still set up registered charities, we still set up things, but we also spent a lot of time saying, don't do it to people. And I mean, I had a wonderful, here in the UK, I had a wonderful cathedral come to us and say, we want a 501c3, and we said, why? And they said, you know, you could have a fund with our foundation. And they said, no, all the other cathedrals have 501c3, so we should have one as well. And we said that was a really bad idea. So we've got foundations, as most of you will know, or many of you will know, around the world. We've got 7 now. Canada's just come on board. Revenue Canada decided they were trying to be the most difficult revenue department in the world, and I think they've succeeded. But with the idea that those were major markets, so we could say to people that they don't have to set up entities with us, you know, in those things, they could have a fund with us, and that's the way we're proceeding. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I think first I really wanted to turn over to Jane, who is going to talk a little bit about just the whole issue of American entities fundraising abroad, and then she'll come back to me, and I'll do a little survey of the rest of the world and where we are with all of that, and what we're seeing with our foundations and various things. And then, but please ask questions at any time. You know, difficult questions, don't ask them. Well, you ask Jane because she'll know the answer. Yeah, so it's very participatory, and you know, just put your hand up or put your, you know, your little symbol-y handy thingy up, and you know, let's just keep the conversation going. Jane?
Thank you, Nancy. I thought I'd start just very quickly by giving you all a very brief summary of who I am, what I do, why I'm here. I am an attorney in Los Angeles. I have my own firm of 8 attorneys, all of whom are large firm refugees. And we specialize in international work. So I do US and international estate planning and charitable planning. I have partners who do international income tax and business planning, but we're a very focused boutique. I have been working in the arena of cross-border philanthropy for a couple of decades now, and have taught a course in cross-border philanthropy for the Certified Specialist in Plan Giving program here in Los Angeles at Cal State LA for 18 years now. I love working with my clients who want to fund charitable projects abroad, and my universities and hospitals that want to raise funds abroad. But I feel that a large part of what we do is educating our clients. I know that we have a very mixed audience today. Some of you, Cornell, Carnegie Mellon, you know this stuff inside out, no doubt. But we have other participants who may not be familiar with some of these basic rules. And I want to talk a little bit today in my limited time, which I will respect, about both inbound and outbound. And so that is US charities wanting to raise funds abroad and foreign charities wanting to raise funds from US donors. And I am going to start actually with the US charities wanting to fund projects abroad, because those of you who are on the other end of it, who are non-US nonprofits or NGOs hoping to raise funds from us, I think it's helpful to understand a bit of the challenges that US charities go through. Clients come to me and they are very excited about a project that they want to fund abroad. Perhaps they've just come back from sub-Saharan Africa, wherever it is. And they're all gung-ho, okay, we're going to do this. How do we jump in? I want to move forward full speed ahead. And I go, well, I don't know about full speed ahead. We have some regulations, and you can't assume that whatever you're doing with your philanthropy within the US is going to apply to funding abroad. And so I think of this, and Nancy, you'll recognize this because it's a friend of ours at CAF America who always says, we're concerned with the 3 R's. We have regulatory compliance, we have risk management, we have reputation protection. What does all of this mean? Well, in the US, as probably most of you are aware, there are some pretty generous income tax deductions available to donors for contributions to charities. But donors do not get, generally, unless there's a treaty exception, there is no US tax benefit to making a gift to an NGO or a charity abroad to fund a project there, which means we have to do indirectly what we can't do directly. If our client cares at all about having not only the joy of giving, but the joy of reducing taxes. And so there are due diligence requirements. We have to look into, generally speaking, if the client wants to do this directly, we have to do a lot of due diligence on a foreign charity. We have to try to determine whether it is equivalent to a public charity here, and I'll describe in a moment what that is. And if it's not equivalent to a public charity here, and then we have to figure out what the heck this beast is, how it operates, what it does, and can we structure the gift in a way that our Internal Revenue Service will find acceptable and stay out of trouble. And so I tell my US donors, there are various ways you can do this. You can give to a US charity that has direct operations abroad. So Red Cross, Oxfam, that whole family of nonprofits here. You can give to that charity, and it's the one time when the US charity has direct operations abroad that you can say, I'd like you to use this to support that particular project of yours. If we're not funding a US charity with direct operations abroad, Then the next is what we call a Friends of organization. Here it's a 501c3 that a foreign nonprofit will set up here. It is designed to collect funds here and re-grant them abroad to fund the project that the client would like to fund. Clients frequently will come to me and say, yes, we want to form a US Friends of organization so that it's easier for us to fundraise in the US. And I have to explain to them that they really need to think carefully about this. It's not inexpensive to set this up. There are substantial legal fees. There are ongoing accounting fees. There's all kind of compliance requirements to be dealt with. And unless they anticipate fundraising a rather substantial amount here, it's simply not worth it for them to set up their own organization. If I have a nonprofit that insists on it, of course, I will create a US Friends of for them. But more often than not, what I will end up saying to them is, why don't you set up what's called a donor advised fund? A donor advised fund is a fund that is sponsored either by a US community foundation, which is a nonprofit that serves a broad swath of the community, and many of them are structured now to take in funds and re-grant them abroad. Chapel in York operates this way. They're a marvelous resource for our clients. They don't have to know, or I don't have to teach them all the little quirks and details about the requirements of US fundraising. We let someone else take care of that, who has the knowledge and who is able to make connections with the people on the ground in the jurisdiction that they want to benefit, and to take care of all the compliance for them. And so I always say, this is against my interests. I'm not going to get paid to create your private foundation or your US Friends of organization, but your life is going to be a lot easier. Chapel in York does a wonderful job of this. There are several other international fiscal sponsors who will help with this kind of giving. But I find generally that for outbound, unless my client is a control freak, it's best to use some sort of donor advised fund structure. A donor advised fund from the US end is a fund that typically it's an individual client, sets up with a nonprofit or commercial sponsor. Many of you will have heard of things like Fidelity gift funds. Those are donor advised funds. And the client gets an income tax benefit on day one when he funds that donor advised fund, and can then make recommendations and requests about where grants should be made out of that fund, but cannot direct it. And the reason is the donor would not get a deduction unless he had given up all of his strings connected to this. I made the charitable gift, I got my US tax benefit, and now I have only advisory rights and I can't direct anything. Obviously, the donor advised fund will typically make the requested gifts unless it's for something illegal or to a foreign organization that is not a nonprofit and is not set up to deal with compliance. So, if my client's a control freak, we'll set up a US private foundation. The US has two basic forms of charities. There are public charities, which are typically funded by the public at large. At least a third of their funding comes from a broad base of donors, or they are universities, museums, hospitals that are considered nonprofit by their nature. So I saw we had many people from universities attending today, and you are usually considered a public charity here, and in granting abroad, universities, museums, hospitals are generally, we are able to make a determination that they're equivalent to US public charities. So our foundations and donor advised funds can make grants to them very easily. And a private foundation, for those of you who aren't aware, is typically funded by a single family I get this very often. The patriarch and matriarch have set up the foundation. They do a lot of grant making. The kids may or may not be involved, but these are my clients who really want control and who just can't make the leap of faith to work with a donor advised fund sponsor or a fiscal agent of some sort. So that's the baseline. The education of my clients for outgoing is quite intense. It's you can't just start giving funds to that little school in Uganda you visited last year that so inspired you. Or you can't just think you're going to go into Ethiopia and set up a nonprofit to deal with pediatric AIDS. There's a lot of due diligence that has to happen. Our IRS scrutinizes these kinds of grants. They are very concerned about potential money laundering, potential diversion of funds. And so going into a grant like this, the US nonprofit has to do a lot of due diligence. We have very specific processes. Is it equivalent to a public charity? If yes, go forth. If not, then we need to do a lot of monitoring and getting reports back from the foreign grantee, because the US charity is required to maintain what the magic words are discretion and control over the use of the funds. And what that means, for example, is if a foreign charity is fundraising here, we can say, well, all things considered, or if a US Friends of is receiving donations, we can say, well, all things being equal, we intend to re-grant these funds abroad for this project you would like to support, but we retain discretion and control not to fund that if, let's say, there's mission stray on the other side of the pond. Or if we suspect there's been diversion of funds. And so we spend a substantial amount of time just educating our US donors on all the compliance that's required. And I could go on forever, but I don't have that much time on how we provide them with forms and procedures and a roadmap for compliance when they want to do it themselves, instead of working with an organization like Chapel in York that takes on all of that compliance for them and facilitates the giving. One of the things that we encourage very strongly, for example, is site visits. It's hard to fund a project and really feel as though you know what's going on unless you go once in a while and take a look. We also very strongly recommend that our donors have to be talking to people on the ground in the jurisdiction where they want to fund a nonprofit project. So it's always the people there who understand what's needed and how best to accomplish it. And I find there's a lot of hubris with American donors walking in and going, we know what you need and we know how to do this. And I say, no, go in and listen and partner, and you will get the most impactful giving. So outbound, my donors have to be very, very careful about compliance. And foreign charities that want to apply for grants, say from US foundations or to fundraise here, really need to think about, does it make sense for us to set up our own US charity to collect donations and remit them to us? Although the word conduit is verboten when dealing with the IRS, that's a whole other discussion. But to have some idea that there's going to be a lot of due diligence and you're going to have to jump through quite a few hoops. The fact that a lot of you are from universities, of course, makes that much easier, because typically there will be less due diligence required on the part of a US grant maker or donor. As far as so I've talked some kind of mixed up US people who want to fund projects abroad and foreign entities that want to raise funds here. I have to tell you that 9 times out of 10, what I say to the foreign charity is, you need to work with an organization like Chapel in York. You do not probably need to set up your own American Friends of organization here, unless you think you're going to really raise material amounts, at least start with an organization that knows what's going on the ground, has the connections, understands the compliance requirements, so that you're not burdened with all that. And then if wonderfully you're highly successful in your fundraising here, fabulous. At that point, if you want to, go ahead, set up your American Friends of organization where US people can donate to a US organization, get their tax benefit, and also benefit the foreign organization. US universities fundraising abroad, it's, you know, you're looking at your alumni, the hospitals are looking at ex-patients and families of patients who have been very well served by your organization. What you need to understand is, just as the US does not provide our US donors with tax benefits for funding projects abroad, almost every foreign country does not give tax benefits to its residents who want to fund into the US. I call this a water's edge approach. And so I always work with intermediaries. I'm going to give one not chapel in York, Nancy, forgive me. I had a US charity call me and they said, we have a Korean donor who wants to give us several $1 million and is interested in getting tax benefits in Korea. So I called a fiscal sponsor, Asia Foundation up in San Francisco. And I said, do you have boots on the ground in Korea? And they said, we sure do. And I said, okay, donor, you're going to make your gift through Asia Foundation in Korea, and it will then be regranted to the US charity. Again, you cannot say they're required to regrant it to the US, but that's how it plays out. The donor was very happy because he did get tax benefits under Korean law. And of course, my nonprofit client here was delighted because their donor was happy and they got the millions. So that's a very short sort of summary of the kinds of things we deal with all the time. Nancy, I see I am supposed to finish by 10:30. So I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about more global aspects of this area of my practice.
Thanks, Jane. That was really a really good framing of the whole thing. I thought I would just briefly mention some of the other countries in which there's a lot of people that there's a lot of interest. So just to remember, the UK is the only country in the world that does everything completely different from every place else. We don't have a system of tax deductions. We have a system of gift aid, and which is brilliant for the charities. So when a donor, sorry, the dogs have decided to start barking. When it's like having small children around, actually. When a donor gives to a charity in the UK, as long as they are a UK taxpayer, the charity can reclaim the tax that was paid on the amount of that gift. So if the donation is for £100, and as long as they've paid tax on £100, the charity can reclaim the tax. So that's an extra 25 pounds on the £100 gift, which is fantastic. I mean, that is a really brilliant situation for charities. Now, also, we have an extra special thing with ours, and CAF and a few others have this as well. But our UK and US charities are linked, so that if you've got an American who is in the UK, and they're paying tax in the UK, because of course they're a US citizen, and the US taxes its citizens around no matter where they are in the world. I think it's the US and Philippines only that do that. Everybody else taxes not on citizenship, but on residency. But
Guam,
sorry?
Guam.
Guam, yes. Okay, well, we're going back to the World War II, aren't we? So anyway, so in that case, if you've got an American that's sitting here in the UK, then that person would be able to give to the UK charity. The charity would get gift aid, so you get the 25%. There is a bit of tax relief in the UK, but only a very tiny bit. But even more so, the donor gets a US tax deduction. So it's a great deal. We call it a double dip, but the official thing is a bit less exciting than that. That's a great benefit. It's really only available sort of the UK, US, although we think we've got our Hong Kong charity able to do the same thing for that, but we're kind of keeping it a little bit low key until Hong Kong sort of calms down a bit and we see what's actually happening there. So the UK is obviously a great place to ensure that your donors are giving to a UK charity, whether it's us or something that you set up in the UK, because gift aid is just such a wonderful benefit to you and doesn't cost anything except to have a charity here. I wanted to mention Europe because there is sometimes some issues about Europe. There is no such thing as a European charity. No matter what anybody tells you, the EU has not yet been able to get its head around the idea of having one charity which is registered in all the EU states. The way it kind of works is that one EU state is supposed to have sort of full faith and credit of other countries. So if you have a German donor giving to a French charity, the German authorities are supposed to say, oh, French charity, you're just like a German charity, so the German's going to get the German tax deduction. In practicality, it doesn't work because they never actually like charities outside their own countries. So it is a little bit tricky. There is something called Transnational Giving Europe, which means that the German gives to a German member of transnational giving, which gives to the, say it's French national member of transnational giving, which then gives to the French charity. It is cumbersome. It is sort of painful. I was one of the people who set it up, so I can be quite dismissive about it, but it does work. And Chapel New York actually has a Dutch charity because we wanted to have a bridge into the EU for organizations. So if you've got any donors in the EU, we've got a Swiss foundation, we've got a Dutch foundation. We're happy to talk to you about at least what the issues are. But transnational giving does exist throughout Europe, but don't let anybody tell you that you could have something, a European charity. And Switzerland, not Switzerland, Sweden, by the way, has got rid of its tax deductions completely, and for some reason which nobody can fathom, and they're fighting to get things back. So if you have Swiss donors, don't worry about tax deductions whatsoever. Then as we're going sort of further east, obviously India has its own set of problems, money coming both out and going in, which unless anybody wants to talk about, I think it was Harvard that's actually decided that setting up a charity in India was a huge problem. But we won't, but if anybody wants to talk about India, we can do so. Going further east, obviously Hong Kong is the sort of gateway to China. China has been, as we all know, tightening its laws about foreign organizations fundraising in China. There are still some slightly nefarious ways of getting money outside of China, but still most people in China that there was a lot of money parked in Hong Kong, were still able to get money out of Hong Kong and get a tax deduction there. And Singapore is a really interesting situation because Singapore, if money going to a charity in Singapore, it's got a great tax benefit, 2.5 times the amount of the donation is the tax deduction. But the money has to benefit the Singaporean community. So that's a limitation. But what we're finding is that, and where our Singapore organization is just applying for charitable status, it is a company at the moment. One is that we are able to facilitate research and development grants, which also has huge benefits in Singapore. And the other thing we're really good at is if somebody is doing an event in Singapore and doesn't want to use their own bank account to fund the event or to pay bills and things, they can do so through our Singapore operation. It's very odd, and but it sort of is working. Singapore, of course, is in huge lockdown, as is Hong Kong at the moment. So not much is happening in either jurisdiction. The rest of leaving aside Korea, most of the rest of Asia doesn't actually give tax deductions for money that doesn't benefit the local community, as indeed does Australia. Australia is the other one where we have for years been trying to get money out of Australia without getting a tax deduction. And New Zealand, for New Zealand universities, for example, has been trying for at least the 25 years that I know of, been trying to get a tax deduction for gifts in Australia, because they have so many Australians that are that have gone to New Zealand things. Australia does not give tax deduction if the money leaves Australia, except for poverty. And that's the only thing. And so, you know, education doesn't work, which is a huge disappointment for lots of us who have been trying to fundraise abroad from Australia. So that's my kind of very, very quick kind of rest of the world circumlocation. Because I think I'd rather talk about whatever people want to talk about, what questions you want to ask, rather than going through just country after country in terms of what's going on. Except to say that don't forget about Latin America and Africa. We think of those continents as only being takers, and yet obviously there is vast amounts of wealth there. And I think it's really important that for particularly those of you who have that are university based, that you know that we don't just forget about them, because there is a lot of money there. A lot of money is sitting around in the UK, particularly for lots of African countries. You know, there's just lots of money sloshing around. Lots of Chinese businesses in obviously in Africa, and also, by the way, in Italy, which is one of the reasons why Italy had such a bad problem with COVID at the beginning, because there's a lot of Chinese businesses there. But anyway, I think I would rather be quiet. What Chapel in York has tried to do, as I said, is to have these foundations around the world, so that if we can facilitate tax effective giving. I mean, this isn't I'm trying not to make a PR campaign for Chapel in York, although thank you, Jane, for all the nice words that you've said. But what we have tried to do is to look at things that were existing, you know, look at CAF America, which I also set up, look at some of the other donor advised funds, look at what's out there in terms of moving money from A to B, and really try to see what you as fundraisers need. So in terms of, you know, when receipts go out, to make sure you get a copy of the receipt, just to, again, to be very sensitive to where the needs are and the countries that need to be in. Just like, I mean, there's been a lot of interest in Canada because a lot of money there. Canada, by the way, is its own world. So you cannot make international gifts from Canada. Foreign organizations have to be the agent for our Canadian foundation, so that if the foreign organization wants to, you know, build a school somewhere, and you know, if money's coming from Canada to build the school, we've got to adopt the building of the school as our project, and then you're our agent to undertake it. It is slightly bizarre, slightly odd, but and it used to be that foreign organizations, particularly universities, could register directly with Revenue Canada, and they've made it so painful for most foreign universities that that's something that they're wanting to stop doing as well. Probably in Minnesota, you have a better sense, though, of Canada because you're just across the border. But anyway, so that's kind of me, and sorry for speaking so quickly and all that, but I just thought that would be a little bit of a useful starting point. We have seen that money is still flowing through our foundations, out of America, into America, out of all of the countries. There's been, you know, still extremely large grants. We are wondering whether Zoom is the new gold card for those of us that used to fly around all the time. Interestingly, and I'm sure you've all seen this with your own work as well, that, you know, Zoom has been giving people a really great opportunity to do stuff. So, you know, backstage tours that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, getting people like us together in ways where me flying in or Jane flying in is made it possible to have this kind of conversations as well. So it's been good and bad and very creative. If I can do a slight PR, we are having next month a day of discussions. We're doing it 3 days, same conversations, just for international major gift fundraising, to really sit down and talk about what we do about the fact that, you know, the model of you fly somewhere, you have an event, you have your VC in tow, you say hello to everybody, you see one or two of your major gifts, and then you fly on to the next country. Whether that model can be adjusted, should be adjusted as we look at this new, opportunity of being able to engage and stuff. So please, if that's something that would be interesting to you, please have a look at Chapel New York's website, etc. We would be very happy to invite you to join us. They say we're going to talk about cultivation, stewardship, prospect research, a bit of tax gain, but really focused on what to do with major gifts and major donors and how we can best handle it going forwards, because there seems to all of us that there's a lot of opportunity out there, and it's just navigating what makes sense and whether what we were doing made sense, or whether we should be really thinking about both environmentally and also how's the best way to steward people. What do they expect? What do they want? What do they want to see you? How do they want to see you, etc. So that's me. Heather, over to you, and then if there's any questions for either of us.
So I think we looking at the time, I think we could open it for questions. But I would say it's the interesting thing with international giving right now with taxes and regulations has been the growth in DEFs. So donor advised funds that now are not just in the US, but we are seeing them internationally as well. So a donor could have a DAF in the UK and grant out from that or other locations. So I think it's a more familiar tool for those who are based in the US, but I think it's opening a lot of new possibilities internationally as well for those donors who want to set up a fund, or corporations who want to have a charitable fund that their employees can contribute to, and then they can do their CSR work through that fund rather than having to manage it internally, especially for multinational corporations. So I think it's a good way for you to think about who your constituents outside the US may be and different ways they may wish to give to you and how you might want to engage them. But I will turn it over to Beth, who has a question.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciated what I heard from Jane and Nancy. So it's all new information for me. I had a couple of questions actually. The story that you told, Jane, about the donor in Korea. So if that kind of situation comes up, I'm just assuming that there's some sort of a percentage or whatever that the Asia Foundation takes and that allows for that to happen. And that makes sense for a very large donor and very large donation. When you're talking about like sort of average donors, because in our situation, we have like members of our meditation community who live all around the world. And in some cases, for example, in Germany, there is a Turgard Germany that is a charity, so people can give to them directly. But there are other places such as Den Haag, where we have a few people and they don't have any kind of legal structure to, they are just a community that considers themselves under our umbrella. So it sounds to me like maybe one of these DAF situations that's set up in the country where people want to give would be a good option for those like sort of regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill donors. Is that right?
Yeah. First of all, you're absolutely right about how it works. When I go to Asia Foundation and say, "Are you on the ground in Korea?" It's like a regular donor advised fund, except of course they're charging a higher fee. So, and don't quote me on this, I'm sort of plucking a number randomly that seems like what I heard. It might be a 12 or 13% charge to facilitate the gift rather than the normal charge for giving through a donor advised fund. Because although conduits are verboten, as I said, they're functioning largely as a conduit. So they're not holding on to the money and investing it and getting the same benefit. For smaller donors, yes, I mean, I don't know, Nancy, for example, what Chapel in York structure is. I would, my instinct is always find a local community foundation and work with them. But sometimes, for example, I did a project for Wikimedia several years ago where they asked me to advise them on fundraising rules in, I think it was 17 different jurisdictions, all over the place, India, China, the EU, and they didn't have branches or subsidiaries in those foreign jurisdictions. They sort of had loose sister organizations. But most of the donations coming in were expected to be in the $10 to $25 range. Well, do your donors really care about a charitable deduction at that level? And you have to make that analysis. And sometimes for the smaller donations, I would just say that they don't get punished for giving. They just don't get a tax benefit. And Nancy, you may have some insight into that I don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because some people are actually, they'll give a 50,000 without worrying about a tax deduction. I think that, for example, some of these smaller, where you have 3 people in the Netherlands. I mean, for example, if you're trying to fundraise from them, you could have a donor advised fund, for example, with our Dutch foundation. They give to the Dutch foundation, we give the money to you, etc. And it costs an annual membership fee, and we keep 1% to 2%. So it's actually quite a bit better.
That is much
but
better.
We're charging an annual fee of £500 or £2,000, depending how big the thing you want is. So it's always it's also a bit about the fact that if they're a small group and they're not a charity somewhere, do you need that sort of overarching sort of charitable feel for the thing? And you may not. I mean, they may be perfectly happy without that, and then you may need to decide, if you're doing a fundraising campaign, that then you just need the option of suggesting that they can give this way or the other. But I think it's almost, as Jane suggests, it's almost looking jurisdiction by jurisdiction in terms of what's best and what you're trying to achieve by things, because the worst thing, of course, you want to do is spend any money trying to set up things in countries, because that's just always going to be much more expensive than almost every other solution in terms of the fundraising side of it.
So I have a follow-up question, and I think probably for Nancy. But so, for example, an actual specific situation in the Netherlands is that we have someone who has put us in their will already, and they've said, we don't think it's actually going to work out in the end, but they went ahead and did it, I mean, so can you work through an organization like Chapel in York for that kind of thing as well?
Absolutely. There's no problem with leaving I mean, if they've left you something in their will and they don't care about whether it's going to qualify for inheritance tax, and there may not, I don't know what the inheritance tax, I can't remember what it is in the Netherlands. Some countries like Australia don't have any, in which case you don't worry at all about it. They could leave it to the Dutch foundation and then, leave it to you as a secondary thing in case the Dutch foundation dies or whatever. So we have that a lot. We actually find that Heather's working, with lots of really, just when I think we've really figured out all the permutations there are, somebody comes up with something completely different, says, can you do it? And I like to think that that's one of the advantages of not being Fidelity, is that and not being a huge organization is that we can be very creative in terms of how we help with things. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Heather, Justine?
Yes, Justine.
Hi, I was wondering if I could actually pick everyone's brain on a specific gift I'm working on that's really kind of triggering me, and it's relative to Canada. And for reference, Cornell is a registered charity under the Canadian Tax Authority right now. But what the donors are confused on, and I'm confused on and having trouble finding clarity. US taxpayers own a highly appreciated piece of real property in Ontario, and their siblings, and they're under the impression that when one of them passes away, there's going to be a realization of capital gains on that person's portion of the real property. And they're wondering if, and in this case, and in this family, they're going to ultimately have to sell the property in order to meet that capital gain tax in Canada, because they don't have assets outside of this property that have relative value compared to what this property has appreciated. But they're wondering if there's a way to involve a gift to Cornell that could help with that capital gain tax at death avoidance. And I can't find an answer.
And I'm not sure I know the answer, because Canada has been changing its rules around. The US does have a very good treaty with Canada, as you know. And so just to confirm that I recall, what you posited was a US donor who owns appreciated property in Canada. There would be a deemed disposition tax, a capital gains tax on the death of the owner. And can we avoid that deemed disposition tax by making a gift to
The university, either
Cornell
at
in the
death,
US?
yeah, either at death or in some sort of during lifetime, but in some sort of equivalent to a retained life estate arrangement.
You know, I know how it works for income tax purposes, but I can't say that I know how it works for the deemed disposition taxes.
Yeah.
If you want to give me your info in the chat box, I'll be happy to follow up with you on that and get you an answer, Justine.
That would be great. I've called everyone I know in Canada, people all over the US, and no one quite knows for sure.
Oh, goodness. Well, I know folks in Canada who would certainly know, and our brilliant Nancy may know.
No, this is your thing. Jane's your person on this one.
So Justin, please, Justine, please, just if you give me your email address in the chat box, I will follow up with you.
Thank you. And I've been stuck for a few months, so any advice you have.
Oh dear.
Thank you.
I mean, this is a perfect example, isn't it, of the kind of unique situations we always face. It's so interesting, it's fascinating, but the whole point is to try to make it as straightforward as because that's the hardest problem you guys have is to get the money. I mean, is to identify the donors, make the case, and do it. And so really anything that we can do to help get the money through as quick as straightforward as possible, just is really the gold star on this kind of thing.
Great. Well, are there any other questions?
I'll just ask something if I may. Can you say one or two words about Hong Kong and any concern about it being swept into the same rules as mainland China? And I'm sure you're following that. And Mexico, if anybody has any knowledge, we've been doing a lot of discovery work in Mexico where we think our university has a lot of alumni and potential. So those two questions.
If I do Hong Kong, Jane, and then you could do Mexico. I mean, yes, of course, everybody's nervous about what's going to happen in Hong Kong. You can't not be. But there's almost nothing, and our team out there just, despairs of it sometimes. But at the moment, it's still okay. And it's with I think COVID is probably, it's obviously stopped the whole issue of what's happening. But yeah, I mean, is it going to go? I mean, how sad it would be for China to lose, really a star. But yeah, it is obviously of concern.
Yeah. So in Mexico, the US, our best treaties are with Canada and Mexico, of course, because we share borders. A US donor who has Mexican source income can get a deduction for a gift to a Mexican charity, but only against that Mexican source income. So, for example, I represent entrepreneurs who have, manufacturing plants in Mexico because of cheap labor and therefore have Mexican source income and can take advantage of this. If they don't have Mexican source income, there's no tax benefit they'd have to give to a US nonprofit that regrants into Mexico.
Jane, is the same true reverse if you are a
Yes.
Mexican citizen who has US based income?
I should mention that the one weird quirk in the US-Mexico treaty is that even if my US donor has Mexican source income, if he gives to a Mexican church, there's no tax benefit. At the time the treaty was being negotiated, the clergy were rather politically progressive and the Mexican government did not approve of that. And so there is an exception in the treaty.
Can I ask one last question? I know we're really tight on time, but I wondered about Brazil. Somebody mentioned Latin America, and we do have donors in Brazil, but I don't know if tax deductions is even an issue for them.
Yeah, I don't offhand. I don't believe it is, but I wouldn't promise that. I'd have to go double check.
Okay.
My experience has been that generally in South America, I ask my clients to give through a US nonprofit.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. Both in not knowing for sure, but also generally they American interests as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Well, I see that we're at time. So I think we will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again, all of you, for participating today. I'm sorry, Mimi, did you have a question?
Just saying thank you.
Oh, okay. Great.
And goodbye. So thank you for organizing this.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and as Nancy had mentioned earlier, we do have our IFAB conference all online. It's happening November 9th through November 11th. Would encourage you to join us if you're interested in learning more about international major gift fundraising in particular. And again, this is the last of our roundtables for 2021, but we will be kicking off a new series coming up next year. IFAB will be kind of the grand finale of our online offerings for the year. So thank you all who have come. I know some of you have been at multiple roundtables of ours, and we're really grateful for the conversations we've been able to have. If you have any questions after this, please feel free to reach out to any of the three of us, Nancy or Jane or myself. We're happy to answer your questions and help you continue to be successful in your international fundraising work.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.